Okay, so let's start the class. Om Purnamadaha
Om Purnamadaha
Purnamidam
Purnamidam
Purnat Purnamudachyate
Purnat Purnamudachyate
Purnasya Purnamadaya
Purnasya Purnamadaya
Purnameva Vasishyate.
Purnameva Vasishyate.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Shantakaram Bhujagasayanam Padmanabham Suresham
Shantakaram Bhujagasayanam Padmanabham Suresham
Vishwadharam Gaganam Padrusam Meghavarnam Shubhangam
Swadaram Gaganatadrusyam Meghavarnam Subhangam
Lakshmi Kantam Kamalanayanam Yogi Dhyanagamyam
Lakshmi Kantam Kamalayam Yogi
Vande Vishnum Bhavabhayaharam Sarvalokekanatham
Vande Vishnu Bhavavaya Sarvalokikanatham
Shankaram Shankaracharyam
Sankaram Sankaracharyam
Kesavam Badarayanam
Kesavam Madarayanam
Sutra Bhashya Krito Vande
Putrabhasya Vande
Bhagavanto Punaha Punaha
Bhagavanto Punaha Punaha
Ishvaro Gururatmeti
Ishvaro Guru Ratmaneti
Murti Bheda Vibhagini
Mukti Veda Vibhagini
Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya
Brahma Bhavaya
Dakshinamurtaye Namaha.
Dakshinamurtaye Namaha.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
So kindly mute your microphones. We are going to go to the sloka number 29. We had finished it, the 28th yesterday, with Madhusudana commentary. And there was a long discussion on different kinds of obstructions and hurdles that all of us face while we are doing sadhana to reach the level of samadhi. And Bhagavan told Arjuna the hurdles he sort of indicated and explained in detail by Madhusudana Saraswati. Union evam sadatmanam yogi vigata kalmasaha sukhena brahma sansparsam atyandam sukhamasnude. There's this promise of a blissful state of being through meditation on the truth. A continuous meditation on that truth, the sadhaka, the aspirant, the practitioner of this whole science of yoga reaches that level where through identification with that ultimate reality of truth, Brahma Sansparsham, he gets that Atyantika Sukham, the happiness without any limitations. And this happiness is different from the pleasures and pains, whatever we sort of experience at lower levels of our consciousness when we are chasing after objects of pleasure outside of us. And then he mentioned that when you are doing the sadhana in order to establish yourself in the truth, you will have a lot of problems, hurdles, shortcomings, distractions. And these were explained as Vyadhi, Sthana, Sansaya, Pramada, Alasya, Avirati, Bhranti Darshana, Alabdhamobhigatvam, and Anavastititvam. Anavastitatvam. So we have discussed that all kinds of diseases. Sthana is akarmanyata, inability to act, a kind of, and then sansaya is doubt. Pramada is when you have the ability to do something, you're trying to refuse to do it because your mind is kind of either tamasic or there's some kind of a difficulty in your approach, an attitudinal problem. Alasya is laziness, heaviness of the body. Avirati is inability to sort of dissuade yourself from chasing external goals of happiness, which are illusory or delusional. It's a kind of addiction. Then Bhranti Darshana is faulty understanding. You're on the wrong path. You're expecting a result, but the kind of method that you're supposed to follow to reach there, you are not following. And you have something called alabdha bhumika. That means an inability to sort of stabilize your consciousness in the dhyaya vastu, the goal of your concentration, meditation. And anavasti tattva. And once you reach there, a failure to sort of hold your attention there, because there's a bit of distraction there. And once you have laya and vikshapa are these two main contradictions so far samadhi is concerned, then there was again mention of dukkha, which is adhyatmika, adhibhautika, adhidaivika, and dormanasya. Okay, and that is basically kshova vishesha, some kind of a disturbancy that you face when you wanted something and it slipped out of your hands, and you have a sabdivhava, kind of numbness in your consciousness. And that has something to do with the kasaya thing that was discussed earlier. And that's not meditative, and that's not tranquility. That's not a very spiritual state. That's also a big obstruction. Then you have angamejatvam, inability to sort of physically be stable. Then swasa, when you are trying to do, you want to do this rechaka and puraka, you have contradictory movement of air. So when you're trying to inhale gradually, by mistake you exhale, or when you're trying to exhale gradually as per the pranayama rules, by mistake you inhale because you are distracted. So these are vikshepa sahabhuvaha. These are the things we are associated with the problems of distraction during meditation. And then he kind of finally mentions who is Ishvara Parinahadva. You can do all these meditations, reach there, or you can choose the alternative of surrendering yourself and seek divine grace to ascend to a higher plane. That also we discussed. And that is Nirodha Samadhina. Now here in this sloka, he sort of brings back the dialogue to the Vedantic method as a corollary or as a supplementary or even independent of the yogic method. So what we have done in the previous sloka, in the commentary in Madhusudana, is twofold. One is that there is a yogic science of tranquilizing, not in a negative sense, but sort of ensuring that your mind enters a state of equanimity and you become God-focused or truth-focused, and your consciousness becomes very sharp and subtle. You become a Sukshmadarshi. Once you are that, the presence of the truth of the God, it flourishes, blossoms in you without much effort. Directed at trying to achieve something external. Because we have discussed that when you purify a Sat container, what is there? Pure space. Similarly, when you clean up the mind, what is there? Pure consciousness. The name and form is basically impositions. So you're thinking about X and Y and G. It's like all kinds of things we are putting into a small basket. You clean the basket of all these elements, all these items. What is there inside? Pure space. Similarly, when you are able to block the mind in a very positive sense by orienting it back into its source, then it becomes closed from all sides. It attains its realization about what it is. The consciousness becomes luminous because there's no external object to disturb it, to cause any modification in it. That is the Nirodha Samadhi or Ishvara Pranidhanadva. And who is that Ishvara that we also have discussed? That Klesha Karma Vipaka Asir Aparamrishtaha Purusha Visheshaha Ishvara, as per the yogic theories. And that means what? The klesha, avidyadi, and karma is all kinds of good and bad acts, and vipaka is maturity of your actions, which means karma phala, result of the action. He has no consequences to suffer. Asa is vasana or desire. He free from all this. Not as a jnani, because a jnani will have an early phase where he has all these problems. And then you have the prakriti layer, another category of people who reach a level of equanimity, but then fall from there and go back to birth and death. So they have future problems associated in their sadhana. But this Ishvara is one, that Purusha Vishesa, that means that pure consciousness, which was never overladen with this sort of problems and shall never be at all touched by any of these problems. And therefore, is Nitya, pure, Nitya Suddha, that Vastu. Okay, and he's the guru of all the gurus because he was always present, irrespective of when the gurus got their knowledge. He was always well in advance, waiting to guide them. Now we are going to the next verse, and Madhusudana gives a beautiful introduction. So I'm just reading it, and we'll do this Sankara Bhashya after doing the sloka. He says, Tadeva nirodha samadhina twang pada lakshe tat pada lakshe ja suddhe sakshat krite tadeka gochara tattvamasi ityadi tattvamasi iti vedanta vakya jana nirvikalpaka sakshatkara rupa vrittir vahya vidya ब्रह्म विद्या अभिदाना जायते ततश्च कृत्स्न अविद्या तत्कार्य निवृत्त्या ब्रह्म सुखम अत्यंतम अश्नुते इति उपपादयति त्रिभिः श्लोकैः तत्र प्रथमं त्वं पदलक्ष्यो उपस्थितम् इति आह उपस्थितिम आह. So what Madhusudana Saraswati is now saying is that he is bringing back that Vedantic discourse of establishing the non-difference or equality or sameness between tat padartha and tvam padartha. Tvam padartha is the jiva, all of us, not in this physical body or with a mind, but all of us in our consciousness, the pure consciousness, and the Brahman as consciousness are two manifestations or two appearances. We cannot use the word manifestation, it's just two appearances of the same one reality. Like, what is the difference between the bubble and the ocean? These are two names about two aspects of one fundamental reality called the whole mass of water, right? And then you give different kinds of names. That this is a bubble, there are 20 bubbles, and that is the ocean. But these bubbles and the ocean are all water. In that sense, the Tvam Padartha, which is all of us, our consciousness. So you do Tvam Padartha Sodhana through these yogas. You purify that individual consciousness when it becomes very, very subtle, and the truth of the divine, the Brahman, the absolute, blossoms in that consciousness. When that happens, Brahmavid Brahmeva Bhavati, that consciousness, which is the final blossoming of the truth, represents unity. There is no duality, there is no dheya padartha, there is no meditation on something or somebody. The very consciousness, the very meditation represents that divinity. And it is no different from whatever you describe as God or X or Y or Z, because the God is also a name and a form. We are talking about a reality which is beyond God. That is the beauty of it. So a lot of Westerners that you talk to will make fun of Hinduism, saying, this is a religion with polytheism, a lot of gods and goddesses. But this is also a religion which talks about a reality which is beyond God. So it talks about a beyond God experience. That is the ultimate divine experience. The divine experience in this ultimate goal of divine experience or religious experience, or spiritual experience, in our tradition is not getting stuck at the temple or with a name or a form, but using that as a ladder to break free from all of it and reach that state where there is no meditator and there is no meditation and there is no object of meditation. All these sort of dissolve into one fundamental, infinite, blissful, self-luminous reality. That is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. And he's saying that in the next three verses, 29, 30, and 31, these Tattvamasi, you are that, you are no different from the Brahman, not as this body, as a man or a woman, as an old or a young person, but as pure consciousness. You and the ultimate reality are just one consciousness. This Bhagavan is explaining. The ultimate secret of Vedanta is being explained by Bhagavan to Arjuna, which is all of us as aspirants of spirituality. So let's look at this first sloka and we'll make sense of it. What he says, Tadeva nirodha samadhina tvam pada lakshye tat pada lakshye cha suddhe sakshat krite. That Tvam-pada is your chitta, that mind with which you are starting, and you are doing Tvam-pada Sodhana, cleaning of that Tvam-padartha. Tvam-pada, who am I? You're cleaning it through meditations. So So you have Savitarka, then you go to Nirvitarka Samadhi, then you have Savichara Samadhi, then you have Nirvichara Samadhi, then you have these, these Ritamara Prajna, Adhyatma Prasada, and then after Ritamara Prajna, you're all the time established in the truth. Then you go higher and higher towards Nirudha Samadhi. So Sakshatkate Tad Aikya Gochara, and then you see the unity between the individual and the absolute. Tattvamasyadi, Tattvamasi, iti Vedanta Vakya Janya. So he is not a pure yogi. He's a Vedanti who is doing yoga. He has the added advantage of the Shastra Jnana, which is provided and offered by the Upanishads and explained by great scholars and gurus and acharyas of the Vedanta Parampara, like Shankaracharya, Gaudapadacharya, and many commentators, including Madhusudana Saraswati. Then Nirvikalpaka Sakshatkara Rupa. And this particular thing, which is Nirvikalpa, without a name and a form, that witness of that truth, Vritti Brahma Vidya Avidana. So this particular thing, Brahma Vidya, that is a word which mentioned. You have Brahmakara Vritti, Brahma Jnana. Now this Brahma Jnana is different from Itihasa Jnana or Bhugola Jnana or computer Jnana. This is Jnana about something. Brahma Jnana is not Jnana about something. It is in the initial stages. You can say Brahma Sambandhya Sastriya Jnana. That's academic knowledge. It's Poroksha Jnana. Aporoksha Jnana is a direct perception. And that is not Brahma Sambandhya. That Jnana itself is Brahma. Because there's nothing else. Everything is consciousness. And this consciousness is given a lot of names and forms. As Karta, as Karana, and as Bhogya, and Bhoga, and all these words are ascribed to one consciousness at different points of perception. We see it from different angles. You take a picture, you have a big mountain, and you take snapshots. You can capture a beautiful flower, a piece of rock, or a certain water source, or a trekking trail. You can see all that. You can take one snapshot, a mid-shot, or close up, whatever. But that's not the mountain. You cannot capture everything with a small lens. Okay? So, Sakshatvite, Nirvikalpaka Sakshatkara Rupa, Vrittihi Brahma Vidya Avidana. It's known as Brahma Vidya Jayate. Jayate not as Karya Rupa again, because Brahma Jnana is never born, because you are Brahman. It's only remembrance. It's a certain way of removal of ignorance. That is the way Vedantins mention it. A person gets moksha because he gets jnana. What it means is that he always is having jnana. He sort of discovers it by removing the obstructing names and forms and obstructing sanskaras or impressions of the past, which tells him that he is limited. Tatasya, Krishna Abhidya Tatkarya. So ignorance comprehensively is removed, and the work of ignorance. You have doubt, then you are taking a wrong decision. You have a faulty knowledge. You don't know how to cook a recipe, so you cook a wrong recipe. It tastes completely different from what's written in the book. So avidya tatkarya, the ignorance and the products of that ignorance which manifests in faulty behavior and faulty chasing we do in our life, the craving we do in our life, because we do not know what to actually aspire for because of a faulty understanding. Brahma sukham atyantam ashnute. When he gets rid of these ignorances, he experiences that ultimate bliss. Iti upapadayati trivihi slokei. Okay, so that much is clear. And tatasa prathamam tvam padarlakhyo upatitim aha. So the first sloka is talking about that Brahma Sukha that he experiences by purifying the tvam padartha. Okay, now here, the critical question up here is that if you look at some good commentators like, say, Nilakantha or Purushottama, they're linking this sloka with the earlier sloka where there was this mention that he gets what? He gets Brahma Sansparsham Atyantam Sukhamasnute. Sukhena Brahma Sansparsham Atyantam Sukhasnute. That is the previous verse. So what is that Brahma Sansparsha Sukha? And if he actually attains that Sukha, how does his mind work? What is the form of that Sukha? It's like a small college student is talking to a senior guy who has got a is an internship in a big multinational company where there's a lot of R&D work going on, and this guy is a young budding, scientist at the college level, undergrad level, and he meets that senior who is already an intern after doing a PhD in a big scientific research company. He meets him and says, "Okay, can you tell me what are you doing? What does it mean to work with NASA or to work with, let's say, in India, for example, to work with the BARC or something? What does it mean? What do you do there?" Right? He wants to know what it means to be there. Like an economist would like to know, what does it mean, chief economic advisor to the president or the prime minister of India? What does it mean? Similarly, he's trying to explain through this sloka, what is that Brahma Sansparsha? When he sees himself as not different from Brahman, what kind of understanding he has? Can we capture that in words? And yes, it can be captured in words for poor students like us, because actually it cannot be captured in words. But then we need words, like the mother trying to teach a small son about how much is 3 plus 2. She cannot explain. So she says, these are 3 fingers and these 2 fingers. And if you combine, you have 5 fingers. So it's 3 fingers plus 2 fingers, he says. But that's not equal to 3 plus 2. And like, for example, in the first class of algebra, when you were in school, how does the teacher introduce you X and Y? He says, if you combine 3 apples with 2 oranges, what do you get? And the students say 5 fruits. He says, no, you cannot add 3 apples with 2 oranges. Well, what's the answer? The moment you say 5, he laughs. He says, no, that's not the correct answer. The correct answer is 3 apples plus 2 oranges, because you cannot combine apples with oranges. They're 2 different categories. Then the students get used. He said, therefore, when you mix 3x with 2y, it's not 5. It's 3x plus 2y. That's how algebra starts. In many of the Indian schools, I don't know, but other places. Similarly here, Bhagavan is trying to hint to Arjuna, what is the way in which a person interacts and understands the reality to be once he has a certain realization of the absolute mentioned through the word or the concept called Brahma Sansparsha. Atyantam Sukham Asnute. What does that mean? So let's look at the verse. Sarva Bhutastam Atmanam Sarva Bhutani Cha Atmani Ikshate Yoga Yuktatma Sarvatra Samadarsanaha. So let's first make sense of the verse, then we'll have elaborate commentary to look at. Sarva Bhutastam Atmanam. So in Sarva Bhutasta, if you look at everything, Sarva Bhuta, Bhuta is what? All these, water and earth and fire and air, these are all the Panchabhutas. And whatever is established or constituted by these 5 material things. These are the Sarva Bhutasta. Embedded in them, embedded with and by them, Atmanam. Sarva Bhutani cha Atmani. So the one who sees Atma, or the pure consciousness, in all external material objects. What does that mean? We'll make sense of it. So he kind of sees the absolute truth as having manifested in all the gross material objects that he sees. Right? So this is inside out. Is the subtlest of the subtle material called Brahman. There are wrong ways to talk about it, but there is no other alternative, so I'm just using it. It's a layman's bad way of explaining how the Brahman manifests. So imagine the subtlest of the subtler realities, which is without a name and a form, it's inside out. And that manifests as so many things. And that is what? Is the Sarva Bhutastha. Then he sees that as Atma, as consciousness. Sarva Bhutani cha Atmani. And then when he meditates or thinks about the self, he knows that all these beings that I'm seeing are not different from each other. Men and women in different nationalities, different social groups, rich and poor, and living and non-living, movable and non-movable, everything that I see all around me with my senses, they are ultimately emanating from one truth, and they're established in one truth, and that is the Atma Vastu, the consciousness, pure Chaitanya. Ishyate Yoga Yuktatma. And who is able to see that? Who is that fellow? He's saying that this Adhikari in the earlier sloka, you remember we had Sukhena Brahma Sansparsam Atyantam Sukhasnuti, and Madhusudan in the last sentence said that Tadeta Chitta Prasadanam Bhagavat Anugrahena Yasya Jatam Saha. He gets that and he's saying only a person who has conquered his consciousness, his mind, he has purified his mind, and he has got rid of raga and dvesa, he is able to concentrate, has got rid of laya and vikshepa, and all these enemies, the 14 sort of sources of disturbance, he has mitigated all these hazards of trying to peacefully meditate on the truth. That fellow, he is the Elizabeth character who, without much of an effort, can realize what is the ultimate truth. He had mentioned that before. And here he's saying, Yoga Yuktatma. This is again extension of the previous verse. He's saying, of course, the person who is able to see, that is the benefit that he gets. Brahma Sansparsham Sukham Atyantam Asnute. Sarvatra Samadarsanaha. And then the person who is having equality of vision. He doesn't see as good or bad or rich or poor. He sees everything as one. Sama in what sense? Emanating from the Brahman and established in the Brahman. In that way, in a very simple way, if I can talk about it. And then we'll graduate to first how Shankaracharya mentions. So now I'll be opening that website to look at Sankara Bhashyam. So, and then we'll go back to others. Sarva Bhutastam, Sarvesu Bhutesu Sthitam. Sarva Bhutastam. Please look at this sloka, 29, chapter 6. Sarva Bhutastam, Sarvesu Bhutesu Sthitam. Whatever is embedded in, established in all the physical realities. Swam Atmanam. And what is established everywhere? Swam, that Atma. He himself, he sees, because he is now, because he is having Brahma Sansparsha, he doesn't see himself as different from Brahman. And because of this, he has a wonderful feeling of unity. He doesn't have raga dvesha for anyone. Why? He is no more seeing himself. He has a divine effulgence in it. He doesn't see himself as different from Brahman. And therefore, he says everything is a manifestation of Brahman, which means what? It's an extension of his own self. Cha Atmani Brahmadini Stamba Paryantani. And then, in reverse, Sarva Bhutani Cha Atmani. And all these material objects are established in Atma. And what are those Sarva Bhutani? What are those material objects? Brahmadini Stamba Paryantani. Starting with Prajapati, the creator, the religious figurehead, who's in charge of creation, and all of the gods and goddesses, the divine beings, the celestial names and forms. Stamba Paryantani. Stamba here is grass. From these angels, the divine beings, celestial beings, the creative gods, to the point where we hit upon the grass in the ground, which are very innocent and helpless. We all feed over them. Just Sarva Bhutani Atmani Ekatam Gatani. All of them are united in the self. They get Ekata Prapta. Ikshate Pasyati, and he sees all that in that way. Who is he? Yoga Yuktatma, Samahita Antakaranaha. The person whose mind, Antakarana, has been established in a state of Samadhi, which has been resolved, free from all kinds of previous impressions, sanskaras, and contradictions. Sarvatra Samadarsanaha. Sarvatra, why the word Sarvatra? It's not that he's selectively having some kind of Samadarshita, like he's sitting in a meditation and giving a philosophical talk. It's very easy to appear very wise. Then he goes to a crowded queue. He has to check in at the airport, and there's some person who overtakes him. Then you see his Vedanta comes out, He gets angry. No, sarvatra samadarsana. Sarveshu brahmadi stavarantesu. Visamesu sarvabhutesu samam nirvishesam brahma atmekatva visayam darsanam jnana jasya saha sarvatra samadarsanaha. So he has the tranquility in him, that equal vision, that all the elements and objects that he witnesses around him or in front of him, whether it is moving or non-moving, Visamesu sarvabhutesu, who appear to be different from each other, samam. He sees all of them as nirvisheshan, the specialities, individualities, which we attribute to the objects that we see in front of our eyes. He sees them essentially as one fundamental truth. What is that? Consciousness. Brahmatmikya Tvavishayam, and sees that as not different from the Brahman. One object, one truth, everything. Darsanam Jnanadasya. That sort of understanding or attitude has dawned on whom that fellow is called Sarvatra Samadarsana. Etasya Atmaikatva Darsanasya Phalam Uchyate. And therefore, in the next sloka, he will talk about when you have this sort of Atmaikatva Vishaya, we'll talk about the phala. Before I go to Madhusudana Saraswati, I'll briefly talk about a bit about Ramanuja, who also sort of makes a beautiful interpretation of this sloka. Swatmanah parisamcha bhutanam prakriti viyukta swarupanam jnaneka karataya samyad vaisamyasata prakritigatatvat yoga yuktatma prakriti viyuktesu atmasu sarvatra jnaneka karataya samadarsanaha sarvabhutastam swatmanam sarvabhutani cha swatmani ichyate. Now, this was one aspect because we have mentioned it. We know, we have studied right now the Sankhya and Yoga, elements of that. In the course of the discussions which followed verse number 15 and then 28, long discussion, right? And we know that the Purusha doesn't undergo any modification. What undergoes modification is the Prakriti. And that Prakriti, or what is also called Pradhana, is Jada. But because of a Sannidhi or proximity to Purusha, which is the principle of consciousness, because of this proximity, it behaves as if it has consciousness and agency, and it starts creating things. Because without consciousness, you cannot have active agency. This Pradhana, which is a state of balance between Sattva, Tama, and Rajas, becomes an active agent because of the felicity of its proximity with this Purusha. It starts creating things. And everything that you see, Mahatattva, and then you have these, Mahatattva or Buddhi, or Ahankara, then Manas, then Panchendriya, Jnanendriyas, Karmendriyas, Tanamatras, Panchakutas. All the 23 that come up, these are all Vikara Rupas. Tanamatras and Buddhi, these are sort of, what do you call it? These are some Prakriti Vikriti, they are only some Vikriti. So these are all Karya Rupas in a certain way. Outcomes of modification of Prakriti. Okay? And the Purusha is different from this. It's pure consciousness and is not tossed by anything. Swatmana pareshang bhutanam prakriti vyukta surupanam. So what he's trying to see is that all these external realities that you see are essentially what? The modifications of the principle of Prakriti, which modifies itself and assumes names and forms. The Purusha doesn't have any names and forms, but we are not Sankhyas, we are Vedantins. And he sees a kind of a unity between them by seeing that, end of the day, it is that Atma Swarupa which is appearing as so many things. And that is the beautiful thing that it brings in there. Sarva Bhuta Samanakaram Swatmanam Prakriti Vyukti Swatma Samanakaranani cha Sarva Bhutani Pasyati Ityarthaha. So we are not going deeper into that. We will come back, and there is one more person who I think spoke a little, then we'll look at it tomorrow. Maybe this, let's come back. So now let's look at Madhusudana Saraswati, who beautifully explains it, and we'll try to finish it We have 20 minutes. We'll try to finish it. Sarva Bhuta, okay. Sarveshu Bhuteshu Stavara Jangameshu Sarireshu Bhoktritaya Stitam Ekam Eva Nityam Vibhum Atmanam Pratyek Chetanam Shakshinam Paramartha Satyam Ananda Ghanam. Okay, he's now, it's a long sentence, and that is the technique that he uses, Madhusudana Saraswati. He comes up with long sentences where he sort of, packs it with a lot of adjectives and words to convey in a very comprehensive way what he has in his mind. Sarvesu Bhuteshu Stavara Jangameshu. In, here it's the seventh case, right? Seventh case, Bahuvachana, plural. Sarveshu Bhuteshu, all the material realities. And then he expands that. Stavara Jangameshu, all these moving and trees and animals and birds and humans. Imagine whatever you can. Sarireshu, all the bodies. Bhoktritaya. Okay, Sthitam Ekam Eva. In all this, that consciousness, that Sakshi Chaitanya, is a witness who is sitting in all them. They are kind of behaving as if they are Karta. And this particular thing, that Atma Vastu, that Chaitanya, is present in all these as Bhoktritaya, as a Bhokta. He's not active, but whatever they do, he witnesses it. As if he's the king and it's all being performed for him. Sthitam Ekam Eva Nityam Vibhum Atmanam. So there is this witness self which is present in all of this, and that is Vibhu. Vibhu means not limited. It's not a restricted entity. It is an unlimited entity. Okay? It's a subtle entity. Vibhum Atmanam Pratyek Chetanam. That pure consciousness, which has been limited by a body or a name and a form. Like, for example, you have a pot, the space inside it, you can call it pot space, if I can talk like that. Or you have, if I look at the pen, what is the space inside? It's the pen space. Which space? We are just way of describing it. Pratyek Chetanam Sakshinam. Paramartha Satyam Ananda Ghanam. Then he sees that in all these physical objects, he sees that Paramatma Sat Paramartha Satyam. That is the ultimate truth. All these material appearances are Vyavaharika Satya, phenomenal realities. What is Paramarthika true about them? That Chaitanya or consciousness which permeates and pervades these diverse appearances of one fundamental reality. Like you have space in million pods, and you can say million pod spaces. Ultimately, it's just the space. Same way. Sakshebhyo anrita jada parichinna dukkha rupebhyo vivekena ichyate sakshat karoti. What is Sakshi and Sakya? Okay, so you have Sakshi, the witness, and there's something which is being witnessed, right? So something which is being observed and something which is observing. Now, what is the observer self? Is that witness self doesn't interfere with anything. But then these realities are Sakshya. Okay. Then what is saying Sakshebhyo anrita jada parichinna dukkha rupebhya. And all these material beings that we see, removed from that pure consciousness. Till they realize their pure conscious nature, they are trapped in the samsara, diverse facts and figures, and they suffer. And he sees the self as hiding in all of them as different from what appears it to be. What it appears to be. Vivekena, with that analysis, discrimination. Ikhyate sakshat karoti. Ikhyate means pashyati. It doesn't mean he is seeing that with eyes, physical eyes. He cannot do it. What he does, he uses his analytical eyes. He uses his intuition, his understanding to penetrate these appearances, these apparent realities, and looks at that subtle unity beneath and behind all that appears as diverse and different from each other. Tasminsya Atmani Shakshini Sarvani Bhutani. And in that Atma, in that fundamental reality, in that truth, in that Brahman, Atma, Tatmincha Atmani Shakshini, which is the witness, Sarvani Bhutani, all these physical beings, Sakshyani, Adhyasikena, all these Sakya Vastus, all these things which appear as doers because of a faulty understanding, they are adhyasikena, because of a faulty superimposition. It's like this. The space inside this pen is pen space. It's actually space. This name that's a pen space is a superimposition on the pure space which is inside it. This is a name I am imposing on space which is apparently delimited by the contours of this physical object. Similarly, we have given names and forms to ourselves and to different physical objects because of our ignorance. That's what Vedanta says. For ultimate intuitive understanding of the fundamental reality will enable us to see the fundamental unity of everything. And when we do that, what happens is that adhyasikena, we can figure out that this is an imposition. And once we are able to see that these are impositions, it becomes much easier. Adhyasikena sambodhena bhugyateya kalpitani sakshi sakshiyoho sambandha antara anupapattehe mithya bhutani parichinnani jadani dukhatmikani sakshinaha vivekena ikhyate. You know what he says is the reverse of what he said a little earlier. He sees Atma in everything. Then he says, these names and forms, my friend, my wife, my husband, my son, my daughter, my boss, these are my reporting staff, all these kinds of things. Ultimately, what he's trying to say is that at a phenomenal reality, yes, they are true. They are facts of life. What are facts of life are not ultimately true. And therefore, he says that the Sakshi and the Sakshya, and these, you cannot make sense of their presence if you don't bring in this faulty division of a witness, that pure thing, and these are all names and forms. There's no other way you can establish the ultimate fundamental existence of these objects that you see as diverse, as multitudinous. That is how he's talking about it. Okay? And therefore, and these are mithya bhuta, ultimately false. Okay, ultimately false, and they are parichinnani jadani. They are appearing as if they are restricted, different from each other. Dukhatmikani, and they are full of pain and frustration and all kinds of. He's saying he sees that all of them ultimately are truth. So he doesn't disrespect a person just because he appears a little stupid or talks like that. Even the greatest sinner that you come across, there is pure consciousness. And the greatest saint that you see, this consciousness. Ultimately, there's no difference. And once he sees that, he has an experience of equanimity, that Brahma Sansparshan. That is the sukha he's describing here. Okay? Kaha, and who can do that? Yoga yuktatma yogena nirvichara vaisaragya rupena yuktaha prasadam praptaha atma antakaranam yasya sa tatha. Who is that guy? Yoga yuktatma. So there are two ways he'll try to identify who qualifies to enjoy the truth in such a precious, blissful way. There are two adjectives he uses. Yoga yuktatma and sarvatra samadarsanaha. He's a guy who is a samadarshi. He's also a guy who is a yoga yuktatma. So either we can look at this fellow through the window of the yoga sastra, the yogic sciences, the methods of yoga he has used and reached that ultimate level, or he could also be a person who is a great jnana yogi and he has sort of reached there through analytical practices. Like in Buddhism, the Prasangikas, they do a lot of meditation which is analytical. It's not about concentrating. They are the analytical meditators. Okay, and so they have a different way to look at it. They're saying remove all the clutter from your mind, and what remains? He says, no, nothing remains. What about me? No, you don't exist. What do you think? What do you think about that? What remains? It's a stupid question. Actually, nothing was ever there. And what about me and my mind? I'm thinking and this study and all. These are names and forms. That's how they look at it. And we just add this word called Brahman or Atma because we have a way of kind of teasing the Buddhist cousin of ours who's saying more or less the same thing. We ask our Buddhist cousin this question, who is saying all this? But actually, that Buddhist cousin is going to come back to us and say, okay, I'm saying this, and I'm saying that I don't exist. You will say that. But they have what is called non-self theory, or this, and we have what is called the Atmic theory or the self theory. That is the only difference. What they call Sunya, we call Purna. What they say doesn't exist, we say, yeah, we also say that doesn't exist. And there is something which is fundamental there at the end of the day, and what that is called Atma Vastu or Brahman or whatever. So some strands of the Mahayana Buddhism is very close to the Vedanta, except that they can fight over the language, but fundamentally they are saying the same truth in slightly different languages. And it's good, not a problem. Diversity is very nice. It gives us an occasion to share our hearts. Because if you remember in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, when there's some discussion as to why God created this whole universe, there's a beautiful sentence, Ekakina Ramate, there was no love. Because one person cannot love. So he sort of creates diversity and dualities so that there's an experience of love between people. Good way to explain it. Ultimately, this whole truth, the stories of creation, Vedanta says are false. These are meant to tell you why you should overlook this whole creative theory. Anyway, that's a longer debate. We'll go there in course of time. Now here what he says is Kaha, who is he? Yoga Yuktatma. And he goes back to all that we discussed when we had discussed Savitarka, Nirvitarka, Savichara, Nirvichara. After Nirvichara, what we had said, that when you have the sutra, that 47, Nirvichara Vaisaradhye Adhyatma Prasadaha. When you have Vaisaradhya, you perfect that Nirvichara Samadhi. And what is Vaisaradhya here? Vaisaradhya is when the mind is unencumbered, unobstructed by the impressions or any problem related to that, and is established in pure sattva. It's absolutely not affected by any of these, and therefore that is called Vaisaradhya. And when it sort of reaches that state, what it experiences is a feeling of great happiness, blissfulness. It's compared to a person standing at the peak of a mountain, looks at everyone else as tiny pygmies, human beings, struggling with life, because he is at the pinnacle of self-consciousness. He looks at everyone, he's full of love. Why? Because he's Atmastha. He has gone to a very high level of consciousness, who is extremely happy. So he finds a girl is crying because her boyfriend kind of didn't pick up her call. And this yogi is going by the side. He looks at her and says, Beta, what happened? Why are you crying? No, this guy isn't picking my phone. And actually, this guy is a very poor guy, the yogi. And this girl is very privileged, and she's having all electronic gadgets and maybe has a wonderful car and something. But this yogi, this mendicant kind of sympathizes with her and said, okay, don't worry, somebody else will come or you will get him back. He walks off. Out of sympathy, he has love for everyone because he sees himself at the pinnacle of existence, because his mind is free from all sorts of kleshas, all kinds of encumbrances. His mind is in the pure land, in the Buddhist language, if you put it. He has the pure mind of the pure land, and is at the top of this whole universe. That is Adhyatma Prasadaha. So he's saying that your yoga yukta yogena nirvichara vaisaridhya rupena yuktaha prasadam praptaha. What prasad? That Adhyatma Prasada praptaha atma antagaram jasya sa tatha. That fellow who has that sort of a purified mind is the one who is able to experience what? He can see the Atma in everything and see everything in the Atma. Right? That's what he can do. And then he's saying, Tathacha prag eva uktam. And I have explained to you earlier, and also in the Yoga Sutra, this dealt with Vitambara Tatra Prajna. That is the verse, sloka sutra number 48 in the first chapter. Ritamvara tatra prajna. Once you have that adhyatma prasada, at that pinnacle of consciousness, your mind can never be viparyasta. It can never be led astray by faulty understanding. By nature, your mind runs after truth. Means what? That means you don't see a good house or a car or some land or maybe first class flight ticket or a holiday. No, he doesn't see them as meaningful. Why? Ritamvara prajna. His intuitive understanding and approach to life is always based on the truth principle. And all these are vikaris. These are changing. They are modifiable. And he loses interest in them. Okay? And then the next sutra, we have also sort of looked, okay? And then the next sutra, we have also sort of looked at it, that's the 49, is going to come. Sruta anagama pragyabhyam anya visaya visesarthatvat. And then he has sort of mentions that this samadhi, or the intuitive knowledge that he has, this jnani, can he get it through by studying the texts, that the Brahman is like this, that the world is like this. Can you get that reality? No. The Yoga Sutra says, no, that's not possible. That you mug up a few philosophy books and you can reach them. Because these shrutis or the agama vakyas can give you samanya jnana. Like, for example, somebody tells you about a certain fruit or a flower which is available on the higher levels of the Himalayas. You haven't been there. Your first time reading it on the lonely planet, and you read it. Do you have Vishesha Jnana? No, you have not even met any person of that area, and you haven't seen a flower or fruit that you're reading about. So you have Samanya Jnana, not Vishesha Jnana. Similarly, you are doing inference that there is smoke and therefore there must be fire. Do you have Vishesha Jnana? Do you have specific knowledge? No, you're inferring. You are doing a kind of derivation. That because I'm seeing some symptoms that there may be a fire, and I conclude there is fire, and it's fine, because you know there is sahacharya or concomitance between smoke and fire. Wherever there is smoke, there is fire. But what fire? Is it bonfire fire, or is it a yajna kundam? There is a certain spiritual work going on. It's ritual fire, or is it a kitchen? What fire? You don't know. You have just seen the smoke, and therefore you can talk about fire. That fire is not specific knowledge. It's about only samanya fire or samanya bandhi, samanya jnana. Therefore, he says, Shruti and Anumana, either by reading the texts or doing logical inferencing, you can never reach the understanding of the Brahman or the Purusha jnana here, which is different from Shruti and Anumana. Shrutanumana pragyabhyam, the wisdom, the intuitive understanding which you get through this yoga at the ultimate level is different from the textual understanding or the logical derivations that you do with the help of logic, inductive and deductive logic. Visaya, visesarthatvat. This is a subject matter which is different from what you can get through a process of knowing or cognitive process which is oriented towards objects outside of yourself, about which you are either studying or you are doing logical derivations. What does that mean? That this is not different from you. And that specific, wider, deeper, and closely approximate understanding of that absolute truth about who you are or what is the pure consciousness is all about is not achievable through the traditional methods of epistemology or cognitive processes. This can be achieved by, in fact, terminating all cognitive processes and allowing the consciousness to blossom where it will become so transparent that it will reflect that fundamental truth of Atma Adi. So we will look at it in detail tomorrow. श्रुतानुमान प्रज्ञाभ्याम अन्य विषया विशेषार्थत्वात् तथा च शब्द अनुमान गोचर यथार्थ विशेष वस्तु गोचर योगज प्रत्यक्षेण ऋतंभर संज्ञेन युगपत् सूक्ष्मं व्यवहितं विप्रकृष्टं च सर्वं तुल्यम् एव पश्यति इति सर्वत्र समं दर्शनं यस्य इति सर्वत्र समदर्शनः सन् आत्मानम् अनात्मानं च योगयुक्तात्मा यथावस्थितम् इच्छते इति युक्तम्. So he's sort of concluding it by keeping in mind the yogic science of what it means to be a Samadarshi. What he's saying here, that this particular intuitive understanding that he gets because being a Yoga Yuktatma, Savada Anumana Gochara, the subject matter that you can discuss and talk about and understand or apprehend, which is called truth apprehension in philosophy, Sabda Anumana, by reading spiritual texts. So there's a discussion about it. Or having logical, inductive, or deductive logic that you apply, Gochara Yathartha Vishesha Vastu Gochara. And all this, which is Pramana Vritti, actually this fundamentally is there. It's not that you are confusing a cow as a tiger. No, you see the cow as a cow. The Yathartha thing. Vastu Gochara Yogaja Pratyakshena. And there are certain things which you cannot see through the naked eye, but there is something called yogika pratyaya that you get it. And that you are getting through this being a yoga yuktatma. That you are getting through this being a yoga yuktatma. You cannot know what is beyond the table or what is beyond this wall. But if you know what is beyond the table or what is beyond this wall, but if you're a yogi, you can actually know these are some of the siddhis which are mentioned in Yoga Sutras, that when you make your mind super fine, super sharp and subtle, it can connect with realities which a normal mind cannot. Pratyakshana Ritambara Sangyena, and that wisdom, that intuitive mind is called Ritambara Pragya. By that name it's known. Yugapas Sviksham Vyavahitam. At the same time, it can be subtle and it can also focus on something external which is gross. Be prakrishtam cha sarvam, and what is beyond the limit or the reach of the physical eyes. The sarvam tulyam eva pasyati, and he sees all of this as one thing, as equal. He doesn't see it's far away from me, it's very close to me, because he can actually connect with anyone, anything, because of a mind which is too transparent, too sharp, and too subtle. Samadarsanam yasya iti, that kind of a guy is called sarvatra samadarsanaha. He can see anything. The Yoga Yuktatma, so he's a Yogi Sarvadarshi. San Atmanam Anatmanam, whatever is conscious and whatever is not conscious, Atma or Anatma, he sees all of them as one. Yathavasitam Ikhyate iti Yuktam. So he can see what is Atma and Anatma, he can have a good understanding, and he knows that they don't have any fundamental existence of their own. They are all established in the pure consciousness. And then he also knows that this pure consciousness is kind of as manifested with different names and forms. That is the fundamental meaning of it. And then we will look at the other half of it, where he sort of expands a little more tomorrow. Okay, so I'll sort of stop the live streaming here, and then we have some question answer if you have any questions in the Google Meet.